Hello guys, and welcome to whatever the heck I called this. I think I called it Late Night Storytime with the Black Knight, unsettlingstories.com. This is a website with very unsettling stories, as it's rightly named. Anyway, on with our first story. I will have to warn you, these stories are pretty graphic. The story my grandfather told about why he got sent home from Vietnam might be the worst fucking thing I've ever heard. Thank you, Max, for writing this treacherous piece of work on March 1st and submitting it. Ooh, that's a nice picture of a millipede. Centipede, whoops. I'm sharing this story because I was forced to sit through it during New Year's Eve dinner, and I'm so freaked out and goddamn itchy that I need to get it out of my system. I'm sure some of you are going to breeze on by this little tantrum here and go right to the meat of the story because you're thinking, hey, I've got a strong stomach. Well, go for it. Boring stuff out of the way, he was drafted, and since he was short and skinny, he was a perfect tunnel rat. Those were the guys who wriggled their way through the ridiculously narrow tunnels the Viet Cong used to transport personnel and weapons, set booby trap, and all that. And when I say narrow, I mean narrow. Here's a pic. Okay, where does it go? Oh. Yeah, that is pretty fucking narrow. Huh. I'm glad that wasn't a bad pic. Otherwise, this stream would have to end really soon. So Gramps was wriggling around in a tunnel one day, and a few bad things happened. First, the two other people with him got killed by a solitary VC while they were standing around the hole. Being a few feet underground and about 20 feet through meant Grandpa couldn't see who attacked them, or know if anyone survived. He later learned he was the only one left alive, but he assumed the Viet Cong attacker would soon start throwing grenades into the tunnel and he'd be done for. After a few minutes with no sign of any incoming attack, Grandpa breathed a sigh of relief and started moving forward again. A little while later, though, it started pouring rain. The tunnel began to fill with water. Now, in an unfinished, unsupported tunnel like he was in, a rainstorm usually meant death for a tunnel rat. He'd heard horror stories from the squad mates who lost others underground, never to be seen again. He figured he'd be another, but he wasn't going to go without a fight. It's better. He crawled forward. With him, he carried a small pistol and a Fulton flashlight. Originally, he'd been sent down to ambush some VC soldiers who were there, who were thought to be hidden in one of the tunnel's larger chambers. He'd crawl through, surprise them, blow their brains out, and wriggle his way back out. At least that's how his first 3 tunnel trips had gone. This one, his 4th, wasn't going so well. The tunnel narrowed as he crawled. Ahead of him, he heard rushing water. He thought it might mean the main chamber was nearby. He was wrong. The sound was the muddy ground above him, sloshing downward, sealing the tunnel ahead. This is where he started to panic. He knew he wasn't particularly deep in the ground, maybe 2.5 feet. But if he didn't start crawling upward through the ground really, really fast, he'd be a dead man. So he clawed. His fingernails tore off and his hands got cut up really bad. But he was able to get part of his arm and face out of the mud. He was unable to move any further. His lower back was pushed hard into the dirt, and the angle had him bent into an elongated U shape. His legs were trapped. Above him, a square foot of light shone through where he'd escape. If he weren't stuck, he knew if it started to storm again, he'd drown. But the rain didn't come. Insects did. Ants were first. Luckily, they weren't the big red ones everyone over there was terrified of. The ones with the bite that felt like you got shot. These were tiny black ones, but there were lots of them. He assumed when the tunnel flooded, they were driven from their homes. Now they crawled over his scalp. face, and neck. They didn't bite, but they tickled and itched. Those which found their way onto his lips were licked off and swallowed. He figured he'd be going a while without food. Let's see here. After a while, the ants lost interest. Flies became a problem, though. To see why, you needed to know the position in which he was stuck. The twisted, awkward angle of his body left one arm stretched out in front of him, but his shoulder and upper back were immobile. So he had a bit of movement in his upper arm, wrist, and hand, but anything below his elbow might as well have been paralyzed. Why is this relevant? Because his armpit was exposed. Not by much. Maybe an inch of clearance, but that was more than enough for the flies. They were very, very attracted to the warm, moist pit. Yeah, gross. Talk about pit stink. Why do I torture myself with that? I find it fun. It's not really torture if you find it fun and enjoy it. Over the course of an hour, 20 to 30 fat, brownish black flies dove into his right armpit. They stayed for a little while, usually no more than 6 or 7 at a time, before they flew away. Of course, while inside they bit. The pain was sharp and awful, he said. It reminded him of that deep, pinching itch of the horseflies on the beach near where he grew up. And he couldn't stop them from doing anything. He just ground his teeth. As the sun went down, the flies started to lose interest and flew away. He knew a few stayed nestled inside, because he felt them moving against the thick hair of his armpit, but the majority had gone. Yeah, must be luscious hair. Lol. Now just mosquitoes remained to torment him with their endless bites and bottomless gullets. Somehow, he slept. From the moment the sun came up, new insects visited him. Of all the massive tropical bugs he'd seen in Vietnam, he was grateful to have so far avoided the giant centipedes he'd heard about. Massive, angry things as long as a man's forearm and as thick as a bottle of beer. One of his more sadistic squadmates hid one in the bunk of another poor bastard. It bit his feet and toes 10 times before he could even jerk himself out of the bed. Grandpa hated even the tiny ones that he sometimes found in his basement back home. So the thought of those big ones made his blood run cold. This is what they look like. God help you. Yeah, that picture's actually here at the top. Alright, going back down here. 5 minutes after he opened his eyes to the morning light, one of them crawled onto his hand and wrapped itself around his wrist. He was too horrified to move. The little movement he had in his hand and wrist might have been enough to fling it away, but he didn't want to take a chance. So he waited. Apparently the thing liked Grandpa, because it remained on him for well over an hour before Grandpa could take the stress anymore. Before Grandpa couldn't take the stress anymore. I have to correct myself every now and then. Jeez. He tried to grab the bug in his fist. The moment he started moving, the thing began to bite. Grandpa was able to get a good grip on it and squeezed as hard as he could. The centipede broke in half in his hand and sent disgusting juices down his arm. The 2 pieces of its body dropped into the hole. The front part still had some life in it, and as it died, bit Grandpa in the nose and lips until he was forced to take its head in his teeth and kill it. He described the taste to us, but I'm just not going to write it out. Yeah, it was that awful. The rest of the day was spent suffering as flies swarmed around the carcass of the centipede. They couldn't get enough of it. For hours he watched them eat, shit, and fuck all over the monstrous bug. The juice on his arm, too, which dribbled all the way down to his armpit, was also like the nectar of the gods for the flies. More and more of them flew in and out of his armpit. He could tell that more were staying within his moist confines, too. The pinching and itching and tickling sensations were occasionally more torturous than the nastily swollen centipede bites. Ants, too, noticed the centipede corpse. This time, the little black ones weren't the only variant. The red monsters with the hideous jaws had arrived. Grandpa lucked out, though. They were more interested in killing the smaller ants than bothering him. He did say one of them bit the corner of his left eye, but the pain was much less than what the pussies at camp were always bitching about. It was here my cousin told him that he missed his calling as a gender studies professor, to which Grandpa simply replied by slapping him on the side of the head and saying, "I don't appreciate jokes about that field of study." What a complex man. Anyway, back in hell, it started to rain. This was a mixed blessing for Grandpa. The majority of bugs scurried away to find higher ground, but he was fairly certain the hole was going to fill in with water and he'd drown. Well, it didn't, and he didn't. He even got a chance to drink some rainwater. He'd been without any real food or water for well over 24 hours at that point, so he was grateful to swallow the few tablespoons worth he'd managed to get. Oh boy, we still have a bit. There was a scary moment when the dirt below his hip shifted downwards and he thought he was going to fall and get buried. Again, he looked out. The shift was minor. He'd been pinned in that strange elongated U shape for a while. And having a tiny bit of the pressure relieved around his groin was definitely a plus. He was able to wriggle his hips and butt a little and figured there was maybe an inch or two of clearance in that area, but nothing that allowed him to get any hope of crawling out. He drifted to sleep at dusk and was woken up before dawn by severe pain in his armpit. He'd known all along that flies were busy damaging his skin and probably eating it. He was resigned to that fact. As long as it wasn't another centipede, he wasn't going to complain. But this pain was new, and it was exquisite. The bites came much more frequently, and he felt a lot of them moving around. That pain, despite its severity, was dwarfed by what came next. Let me just make this known. I don't want to tell this part of the story. Just thinking about it makes me cringe, but god damn it, it's essential to his experience. And I'm sorry in advance for you having to read it. I'll try to make it quick. Okay, yep, not much left. The shifting downward of the dirt was the result of an ant colony collapsing. A big one. All the ants came up out of the wreckage and had been hanging out on the surface of the dirt right below Grandpa's hips. But as he started to settle into the new position overnight, the ants became agitated and swarmed him. And by him, I mean his crotch. Oh gosh. Maybe the only thing that equaled the level of horror at the table as he talked about ants crawling into his pants and rectum was how hard my grandmother laughed as he told it. You've got to get really close to see the scars, she exclaimed, as tears of laughter ran down her cheeks. My brother Derek's new girlfriend turned green and left the table with Derek hurrying after her. Grandma and Grandpa shared a kiss, and he continued with the story. Oh, how touching. With ants up his dick and asshole and flies building a housing project in his armpit, Grandpa suffered through the next 2 days in a haze of pain and fear. Oh, this is just written nicely, isn't it? The lack of food and water had taken a toll on him. This, he told us, was somewhat helpful. The pain grew less accurate. Not accurate. The pain grew less acute as his consciousness waxed and waned. A tarantula wandered into the hole and Grandpa was able to bite its abdomen in half and suck out what was inside. This, of course, attracted more flies, but there was nothing he could do about it. If we didn't get some food and water in him, he'd die. His survival instinct was still intact, despite all the trauma. A couple more days went by and he blurrily realized he'd been stuck for about a week. The rainfalls and insect pulp had kept him hydrated just enough to stay alive. His armpit was numb all the way down to his last rib on his right side. Flies were ignoring everything else and just going straight in and out of the pit. The adventurous ants had lost interest after a while, but every so often he felt a nasty pinch on one incredibly sensitive area or another. More time passed. Late one afternoon, he heard gunfire. He'd heard a quick bit while he was stuck, but it was always off in the distance and too far away for him to get any hope that he'd be rescued. This time, though, it was very close. He was overwhelmed with a sense of hope, which was tainted by the concern that he'd be found by the wrong side, but to his astonishment, it wasn't the Viet Cong who he'd heard shouting after all the gunfire. Grandpa started waving his arm with the tiny bit of movement he could muster. He heard someone yell, "Hey, there's an arm over here." Oh gosh, how's that for voice acting? Gosh darn. Grandpa yelled back incoherently, and was soon greeted by the sight of a U.S. soldier peering down at him. It took him and his squad mates 10 minutes to drag Grandpa out of the hole. He remembers all of them saying some variant of "holy fucking shit" after they'd freed him. Someone radioed their position, and after some unknown amount of time, a helicopter landed in a nearby clearing. Grandpa was loaded onto a stretcher, and they lifted off. A medic who was along for the ride cut off Grandpa's shirt and promptly threw up. When the rest of the soldiers in the chopper looked at what the medic had seen, a few of them also rained puke down from the side of the aircraft. A few days after being rescued, Grandpa woke up in a hospital. No one on the base either, one in the U.S. He had no idea how he got there. Once he was rescued, he passed out and slept for almost 36 straight hours. Some people thought he was in a coma until some poor medic tried to wake him up and Grandpa said, "Fuck off," and knocked the guy out with a single shot to the chin. Charming. Now awake, the doctors told Grandpa the extent of his injuries. Aside from the severe dehydration, he was absolutely riddled with infected bites. The ones on his more sensitive areas weren't much cause for alarm, despite their unpleasantness. It was the bigger bites that were much more of a concern. The one from the red ant was the worst, and for a while the doctors worried he'd lose the eye. His lips and nose had terrible swelling from the infected centipede bites. Even though all those bites were awful, he could have recovered in a few weeks and would have been back in the tunnel soon after, but his armpit was why he was sent home. Oh boy. Botflies are the type of insect which lay their eggs inside flesh. Here's a picture of them in some poor bastard. I've already seen that. Before. I've seen botfly removals. Pretty gross. And again, I'm sorry to do this to you. Until Grandpa's experience, no one knew they even had them in Vietnam, but apparently they do. The underside of his right arm, all the way down to nearly his hip, was completely reshaped into horrible cavities for their larvae. Oh boy, this is where the squeamish should probably not listen. The doctors wouldn't operate, saying the only way to excise them was to let them gestate, and at a certain point suffocate them with adhesive tape so they'd crawl to the surface. It took another few weeks, but that's what happened. Grandpa regaled us with the story of how he personally gave birth to 313 botfly larvae. Then he lifted up his shirt to show us the pockmarked skin. No one said much after that. He was done with the story, and after shoveling a slice of fruitcake into his mouth, he and Grandma left. They laughed all the way to the door. I don't really know what else to say, so yeah, that's Grandpa. And Happy New Year. I like this. Want to keep me from having to eat my limbs? Don't eat today. Alright. That's a good 19 minutes. Wow. Oh gosh. The second story. Again by Max, February 27th, 2017. Comfort food. Alright, the theme in this one is compulsive overeating, disturbing stories, eating disorder stories, horror stories, and scary stories. And we have a picture of glass, which makes me think of lots of internal bleeding for some reason. Alright, so comfort food. My wife lost her battle with bone cancer a year ago. I have no one. I've worked from home for the last 6 months. My employer has been sympathetic and accommodating after everything that happened. Too many workplaces neglect and end up getting rid of disabled employees. I guess I should feel valued. Breakfast was mac and cheese left over from the night before. I hadn't made enough of the meal to be even remotely satisfying. Stock prices and quantitative analytics spilled from my computer monitors as I tried to concentrate on work. My eyes kept drifting over to the picture of me and Bryn on our wedding day. I have no attention span when I'm hungry. I groaned as I lifted myself into a standing position. My knees were shot. I made my way over to the kitchen pantry and got a bag of chips and a bottle of soda. Coughing as I trundled across the office over to my desk, I'd already opened the chips and was pushing them into my mouth. As I walked by and saw my reflection in the glossy murk of my hibernating television, I could swear I saw Bryn standing by my side. When I blinked, she was gone, just like a year ago. By lunchtime, I was finishing the chips and the bottle of soda. I was ravenous. My concentration improved somewhat as I ate, and I made a few good trades that got my company some cash, and me a nice commission or two, but it was noon. The market volume was drying up as everyone went to lunch. I'd start working again around 2 and go hard until closing bell. Until then, I had to eat something. Anything. The pizza delivery guy always brings me extra stuff because I'm a generous tipper. At this point in my career, I earn more money than I know what to do with, so why not spread it around? I lived like that at one point. I ordered 2 large Sicilian pizzas, some mozzarella sticks, garlic knots, and chicken Alfredo. The delivery guy brought me a pint of ice cream and a cannoli. He got a $100 tip. I think my interaction with him is the only person-to-person contact I have nowadays. Oh, that's a generous tip. It's like I'm trying to avoid the story, but I'm not. I rather enjoy these. I sat in front of the TV as I ate. I didn't bother to turn it on. When I looked up after finishing my first pizza, Bryn's reflection was watching me. Her body was distorted by the curved surface of the television. She was shorter, heavier looking, compressed. She moved her arms as if to embrace me. I squeezed my eyes shut and tried to regain my composure. I had to be hallucinating. The lids of my eyes lifted to the side of her face, inches from mine. My scream reverberated throughout my cavernous office space. Before I'd finished my yell, she'd wrapped her arms around me and nestled her head against my shoulder. Everything went white. All I can remember from that moment was blissful warmth and closeness. I can only describe it as reliving the minute I knew I was in love with her, along with all the associated tactile sensations of the most intimate embrace I'd ever felt. The experience couldn't have lasted more than 2 seconds. When it was over, it was as if every organ had been ripped from my body and had been left to exsanguinate on the floor. That means bleed out if you don't know. A feeling of overwhelming emptiness swept over me. My mourning period following Bryn's death was nothing compared to this. I was a bottomless pit of despair and loneliness. The expanse of my lunch was still spread in front of me. Mindlessly, I began eating. Every swallow felt like an eyedropper of water attempting to refill an evaporated oceanscape. But it was progress. I ate until nothing was left. My stomach ached, protesting the amount of food it had been forced to accommodate in such a short period of time. But the hunger remained. The The emptiness remained, and it taunted me. I tried to get on with my day. Work was out of the question. There wasn't much food in my house, so I'd started drinking soda. I definitely had enough of that. One of my closets had countless 3-liter bottles of the generic brand I preferred over the popular ones. I'd gone through 2 of them before I started feeling lightheaded, and I couldn't begin to imagine what this was doing to my already unhealthy blood sugar. That was the least of my concerns, though. Around 8 p.m., I walked out of my house for the first time in almost a month. Everything had been delivered to me over that period of time. Hoping there was still gas in my X5, I clambered into the driver's seat. I was shocked by how much bigger I'd gotten since I last drove and felt my only moment of relief all day when I discovered the seat could go back another few inches. Oh gosh. Poor chap. The car started with no effort, and I headed to the store. I was in no condition to drive. My vision kept blurring, and despite the tremendous pain of emptiness I felt, I desperately wanted to go to sleep. I managed to keep my composure, however, and made it to my destination. Even with the handicap tags on my truck, the short walk from it to the store felt like torture. I was wheezing by the time I'd taken my cart and started pushing it around the front of the store. There was no way I'd used one of the motorized scooters they provide. I don't have much pride left, but I still have enough to keep walking until I simply can't anymore. I bought whatever was closest to the doors and the cash registers. I didn't care what. I had a bag boy help me load up my car with the 3 carriages worth of food I'd purchased. The gratitude I felt for him and his colleague as they pushed and emptied the carts was immeasurable, and I emptied my wallet of cash to thank them. I went home. My entire trip was spent eating. When I got back, I turned off the car and sat in the dark, illuminated only by the dim light of my garage. I frantically worked to tear away wrapping and packaging. Sleeves of crackers disappeared down my throat. Partially frozen TV dinners of meatloaf and mashed potatoes followed. I sobbed as I pushed it all into my mouth, hacking and coughing crumbs onto my steering wheel and dashboard. Only when my stomach pain was nearly unbearable did my feeling of emptiness dip to a level where I had the strength to get out of the garage. It took nearly an hour to unload my car of the colossal amount of food I'd purchased. I crashed onto my couch, gasping for air as stars twirled before my eyes. A few minutes later, after I'd regained some semblance of wherewithal, I felt an acute pain in my right shoulder. When I reached around with my left hand to investigate, I yelped as I sliced into my index finger. Some asshole left a juice glass on the arm of the couch and it had fallen off onto the cushion. That same asshole recently fell onto that couch without looking and shattered the glass with his shoulder. I went into the bathroom. A familiar, morbidly obese man greeted me in my full-length mirror. I turned to look at the damage to my shoulder. Chunks of glass were embedded in my shirt and skin underneath. Despite my disgust with myself and the pain in my shoulder, and stomach, and finger, I felt slightly better. Somehow not quite as empty. Sighing, I pulled off my shirt and felt shards of glass detach from my shoulder and blink onto the ground. The feeling of raw hollowness reemerged like the head of a hydra. I began to cry. I stared into the mirror at my shirtless self, watching the blood trickle from my shoulder in thin rivulets, which were stopped by the absorbent waistband of my sweatpants. I wrapped my arms around my body in desperation. The cheap facsimile of an embrace only served to make me sob harder. I released the hold and started plucking the remaining glass from my shoulder. My misery intensified as each shard got removed. The feeling became overwhelming when I pulled out the last piece. I stared at the shard through my tears with curiosity. Then, without a hint of critical thought, I pushed the shard back into my shoulder. Oh gosh, it's going this way, isn't it? A tiny fraction of my emptiness evaporated. A fraction comparable to an entire stomach full of food. Oh gosh. Yep, it's fully going this way. As if on autopilot, I methodically broke the largest shards of glass I'd removed from my shoulder into hairpin-sized needles. I carefully plunged them into my skin. By the time I'd finished with the glass, there was a semicircle of crystalline splinters decorating my upper arm. Warmth radiated out from the shards and suffused through the surrounding skin. The pain was minuscule compared to the emptiness the glass helped to eliminate. With more energy than I'd been able to muster since my experience with my wife's apparition this afternoon, I hurried to my office to find my stapler. I assumed I was losing my mind. A healthy person doesn't see his dead wife. A healthy person doesn't ameliorate emptiness through food and glass. But what I felt was real to me. It was as real as the floor on which I stood, and as real as the air filling my lungs. As I gasped with the tiny pinpricks of relief, I felt as each staple entered my arm. I drained the stapler into myself, refilled it 4 times, and was left looking for something new to use. Oh gosh. Come on, Steven, keep a straight face. You can do this. I went to the garage and over to Bryn's work area. She would frame pictures and paintings for her friends and family, and even set up an Etsy shop before her diagnosis. Everything was right where she'd left it. An hour went by as I pushed tiny, sharp framing nails into my other arm. These hurt much more than the glass or the staples. I arranged them in a tight sleeve-like grid. Pain radiated throughout the limb. Pain radiated throughout the limb, but I persisted. Finally, I made it through that line. A few times when I blinked, I saw Bryn. Right now, it's the morning after the events I described. I haven't slept. My night was spent finding ways to fill that void inside me. Up to this point, I've been successful. Every part of me hurts, though. Everything. From the top of my head to the bottoms of my feet is covered. Punctured and impaled in some way. Most of it is broken glass from the various glasses and plates in the kitchen. Some of it is from my wife's old sewing box. Each of my fingertips have long pins originating right underneath the nail, and terminating somewhere up toward the knuckles in my hands. It's hard to type with straight fingers. I'm standing at my computer desk because my back and buttocks are caked with broken glass, and the pain is too intense when I sit down. Even though the bottoms of my feet are equally encrusted, I have less sensation in them because of my underlying medical conditions. Just had to clear my throat. When I walk, I can feel the thicker and longer chunks of glass carving at the bone. The part I find most difficult to deal with are the series of thumbtacks in my soft palate. Gosh. They are constantly causing me agonizing discomfort, and they itch just as much as they hurt. I can't help but to trace my tongue around them, which just draws my attention to their presence even more. Alright, grabbing a drink. The constant caustic undulations of searing pain are only tempered by brief, infinitesimally soft brushes of warmth. I know it's my wife trying to touch me again, but the feeling of emptiness within me is still there, albeit far less intense than yesterday. Ignoring it just makes it worse. I have to keep going, but I don't have any space left. Oh, I know where this one's going already, before even reading it. I know what I'm going to do next, and probably finally, and that's okay. Alright, in a few minutes, I'll be opening my belly and thighs and arms, and stuffing them with the entire pantry's worth of our splintered wedding china. I can't live with this feeling of emptiness. If doing this is what it takes to give me some relief and peace of mind and body, it's what needs to happen. I have a knife honed and ready. As I write this, I know with 100% certainty I'm not in my right mind. I've long since stopped caring, and with that, I'm going to go now. Whether or not this plan works, at the end of it all, I might have the opportunity to be with Bryn again. That's worth more than anything in this life. Oh gosh. Well. I guess. Huh. I thought he was going to eat the glass. Guess I was wrong. Okay. I have read this one whenever I was just looking for stories, but it's a decent one at least. Wow. A lot of these are by Max. Thank you, Max. Sprouts. Okay, I'm gonna have to warn you guys about this one. It's not quite as bad as the last one, but it is disturbing. Uh, and it does have to do with plants and slight body horror. My sunflower seed started talking to me last month. I couldn't believe it. I'd been lonely for such a long time. It felt good to have friends. I bet it was my mom who asked them to keep me company. I miss her terribly. The clearest memory I have of Mom was when she told me that all the beauty in the world grows from something small. I was helping her in the garden, and we just planted sunflowers. My favorite. A couple days later, she showed me the tiny burgeoning sprouts that would eventually become the towering yellow flowers I love so much. She repeated what she told me about beauty. I remember being amazed. I'd wake up every morning and head outside and check their progress. Each time they were a little bit bigger. Then there was an accident. A bad one. After that, I didn't have a mom anymore. Dad and I scattered her ashes in the garden right when the sunflowers were at their most radiant. It took years for me to realize how much Mom's death had affected me. I just thought I was a sad person in general since I'd known the feeling for so long. It didn't cross my mind that I'd been traumatized and might need help beyond basic counseling. By the time I considered it, I was pretty far gone. The sunflower seed started talking at an important time for me. I lost all hope of being happy again. Dad and I didn't speak. I had no friends. I spent all of my time alone in my bedroom, wishing I was anywhere else. Anyone else. I developed a bad habit of using a pushpin to make small cuts and punctures in my arms and legs. They made me feel just a little bit better, but I still cried whenever I did it. On that special day, after a particularly painful cut, I heard the chorus of small voices coming from the table. Don't be sad. I jumped. I was alone in the house. Dad was working his first shift and still had another one to go. He wouldn't be home for another 14 hours again. Don't be sad. It's a beautiful day outside. A small package of sunflower seeds sat on the surface of my desk. They were a snack I'd bought on the last day of school. I'd eaten a handful that afternoon and forgotten about them. They'd been sitting there for a week. I wiped my eyes and stood over the desk. Inside the plastic, I could see all the sunflower seeds standing up. Hi, Rachel. I jumped again. The seeds wiggled in their bag, almost like they were waving. Confused curiosity overcame my alarm. I assumed I was going crazy. Well, yeah. Sunflower seeds don't talk to sane people, but they were talking to me. There was something comforting about them, too. Something familiar. I felt a wave of bittersweet nostalgia. The sting of the cut on my upper arm brought me back to reality. It was about as deep as a bushman was long. A thin rivulet of blood drooled down to my elbow. It was so ugly. Almost on cue with the thought, the sunflower seeds began to comfort me. Oh, Rachel, it's not ugly. It was just a mistake. Don't worry. It will heal and you'll forget all about it. Their kind words were in stark contrast to the wound. Its edges were puffy and red, making it look angry, and it hurt a lot. I didn't know how something so small could be so hideous. From the desk below, the seeds continued their praise and support. Amid the voices of my own considerable confusion and discomfort, an old memory resurfaced, one I'd kept below the surface for over 10 years. All the beauty in the world grows from something small. The sentence echoed within my mind, bouncing and twirling and floating. As I considered its meaning and implications, the sunflower seeds watched my contemplation in silence. A minute later, I knew. I reached to pick one up. As the rest of them burst into cheers of joy, I inspected the seed for a moment, then pushed it into the puncture as far as it would go. A sensation of blissful contentment unlike anything I'd ever experienced suffused through me. My eyes closed. Behind my eyelids, I was 4 years old again. Mom stood in front of me, beautiful and tall in her shorts and tank top and gardening gloves. Her smile shone down as she spoke her poignant, memorable words and pointed her gloved fingers at the barely visible sprouts pushing out of the nourishing soil. I lifted my eyelids to the sight of a plain, gray seed poking from the raised edges of my puncture wound like an engorged tick. Before I could tell myself how ugly it was, I stopped. I remembered what Mom said. The seeds on the desk cheered louder. 2 long summer days went by. I spoke to the seeds, and they spoke back. We made plans together. We talked about the future. I'd covered the one in my arm with a piece of gauze. In the morning of the 3rd day, the seeds asked me to take off the bandage. I did with trepidation. It turned out to be entirely misplaced. Inside the swollen, wrinkled edges of the puncture, a tiny, fragile sprout lay curled. When the light from the room hit the sprout, it slowly stood. It was indescribably beautiful. Feeling better than I'd ever felt, I stabbed the pen into myself over and over and over. Arms, legs, belly, shoulders. The only tears I shed were ones of happiness. I planted each seed. I planted each seed with diligence and care. Days went by. The hundreds or so holes in me grew wider as the seed sprouted and grew. I sat on my bed in front of the window to make sure they got enough sun. I heard Dad come and go from his jobs, leaving food for me without ever knocking or saying hello. I was grateful. I didn't want to be bothered. Seed-sized holes became fingertip-sized holes. Fingertip-sized holes became quarter-sized holes. They all leaked, and none smelled particularly good. I remember how Mom had used fertilizer in the garden that smelled terrible. It was always worth it. I stopped keeping track of the days and only concentrated on the sprouts. They were all healthy and growing, all but one near my navel. It had turned brown and was wilting. The other sprouts told me it couldn't be saved. I'd have to remove it or else they'd all get sick. I started the process of pulling the foot-long plant out of my abdomen. I felt and heard ripping sounds as the roots were torn from within. The pain was immense. When it was all done, there was a shallow hole in my belly the size of my palm. It was streaked with white and yellow paste that smelled terrible. I spent some time wiping it away. Afterward, all the sprouts thanked me. Those of you still watching, leave a like so that I know how many of you guys could make it through this. Another long period passed by, maybe a month. I woke up today to the first blossom in one of the sprouts. It was the tallest of them all, sticking out almost 3 feet from my shoulder. All the days leading up to this, I felt excitement. Today, though, I'm too weak to feel anything. It took almost an hour for me to get out of bed. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was home to nearly 80 healthy plants, all between 1 and 3 feet tall. Root systems under my skin ran in complex patterns, bringing nourishment to the heavy, healthy sunflower stalks. We had a long conversation as I sat, barely able to eat the breakfast Dad had left for me. We came to an agreement. I'm using the last bit of energy I have to write this. When I'm done, I've agreed to go out and sleep in the garden. I can't believe I spent years feeling sad, feeling ugly, feeling like I didn't have a purpose. Even though Mom died when I was young, she told me all I needed to know in one perfect sentence. Now I'm going to go out and sleep in the same soil she used to bring beauty in the world. The soil where she slept for the last 10 years. I get to be with her again, and the world gets a new crop of sunflowers. Beautiful things that grow from something small, just like me. Okay. I'm skipping this one. That one too. This one seems fun. Conspiracy theory, horror stories, refugee stories, reptilians, and scary stories. Ooh. I just learned the horrible, impossible truth about a drug called adrenochrome. Starting soon. Grab myself another drink of this tea. You know, I thought about only doing 3 of these, but not too bad. I haven't even gagged yet. Lol. Please help. Someone close to me may be connected to the disappearance and murder of countless children, most of them refugees or otherwise disadvantaged, all untraceable, all forgettable, and now all dead. He told me about a drug called adrenochrome that could produce a high beyond any other. And unlike those other drugs, there are no ill effects. Quite the contrary, there are substantial benefits from consuming it. Greater health, increased vivacity, and a host of other, smaller effects. Combine those with an intense sense of euphoria, and you have a substantial demand. The issue is this. It is a derivative of the chemicals produced by the human body when it is under intense, measurable fear. My former friend, who confessed his involvement during the fleeting crisis of conscience, insisted this was true and cited a number of dubious-looking studies and fake news sites. But then there were the photos. He didn't allow me to make copies for fear of implicating himself personally, but he'd been to a farm, he called it, in one of the Baltic states. There were photos of countless people, all seemingly under the age of 15. They were naked and chained to tables and walls and floors. In a windowless room the size of a football stadium. I couldn't estimate how many there were. As he scrolled through the photographs and I debated killing him, I saw masked men hovering over the victims and torturing them. As they were being tortured, their blood was being drained into containers. Other photos showed the production facilities. Enormous rooms that looked like chemistry labs where the blood was filtered and the compounds were extracted. The worst, though, were the mass graves. Men stood around them and laughed as they unloaded truckloads of carcasses into pits. They used pitchforks to gather up anyone who had been left behind. I asked him why he was allowed to take these pictures. He said no one would believe it was happening, and he's been right. Rumors about facilities like this have been around for decades. Journalists have tried to report on it, only to be laughed out of their editors' offices. One journalist, a Swede, came the closest to bringing it into the mainstream. He died, along with his family, in a hideous house fire. Listen to me. The pictures I saw were not faked. They were not staged. They were, without any doubt, real. And there's one more thing, one more picture. Believe it if you want. I don't care. I need to get this off my chest. There was an image of adrenochrome users. I don't know what I expected. Well, I guess I do. Strung out, gaunt, miserable-looking addicts with despair and desperation in their eyes. It's what we've all associated with drug users thanks to heroin and crack and whatnot. This was different. The image was of a lavish conference room in a skyscraper, where I could not determine. Syringes of the drug were sitting on gilded plates on a thick table of polished wood. I recognized the faces sitting around that table. World leaders, entertainers, religious icons, all grinning, all happy, all ready for their injection. Seeing those familiar faces was the initial shock. It wasn't the final one. On the far side of the table, almost too small to be seen but still unmistakable, was an iconic head of state, a recent one. He was laughing as he reached for his syringe, but there was something unusual about his hand. It wasn't its normal, small, pink self. It was green. It was webbed. It was clawed. It was reptilian. Oh, the Illuminati. Yes. Funny. The Illuminati. Uh-huh. Alright. On to the next one. Sorry, I just had to read the little subtext before. Max, February 1st. Why are these all by Max? The Little Ghost. Dead parent stories, disturbing ghost stories, horror stories, and scary stories. Okay. It does not rule out body mutilation though, so let's see. When the little ghost first started coming to me, it whispered nice things that made me feel good. You have pretty hands. I love how you do your nails. How did you get your skin to be so smooth? He stayed with me all day and all night. As the days went by, though, I must have done something to make the ghost angry. Instead of mawkish pleasantries, the messages grew negative. I've seen other girls with prettier hands. What happened to your nails? I'm sorry your skin looks so dry nowadays. I started to get upset. I'd grown fond of the little ghost. Since he'd always been so positive, it was comforting. Once he started to get mean, I wondered what I'd done wrong. I didn't want my ghost to feel like I'd disappointed him. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I saw the ghost in the mirror. He looked up at me as I brushed my teeth and said, with sadness in his voice, "Your cuticles are so ragged and ugly." Fuck, you can't play Minecraft later. I looked down at my hands. He was right. I hadn't been taking care of them at all since I started that art class. Bits of skin and hangnails sprouted from each cuticle. They were red and angry. Can you get rid of them for me? The ghost sounded so hopeful. I couldn't bear to make him feel like I wasn't the good person he initially believed me to be. What if he left? Well, if he left, it would probably been a better thing. Hey, thanks for joining the stream, by the way. I grabbed the corner of a thick hangnail from the side of my left middle finger. I started to pull backward. It hurt terribly. The ghost, his eyes brimming with hope, told me I was doing such a great job. Even though the pain of what I was doing, I was overwhelmed by relief. I was finally doing something right. Okay. I've had hangnails before. And then I've also had a time where I removed my own pointer nail because it was broken in the middle. So I pulled it out. That was just making me cringe right there, the thought of that again. I kept working on the hangnail. After a little while, I pulled a thin strip from the side of my finger, up my hand, and across my arm to the inside of my elbow. Wait, what? What? It stung terribly, but as tears of joy flooded from the ghost's eyes, I started to wonder if things were getting back to normal. Your hand is looking a tiny bit better, the ghost informed me. Maybe someday you can be pretty again. I spent the next hour tearing the skin and nails from my fingers. Even though they bled and I thought they looked terrible, the ghost smiled and assured me that I had the hands of a beautiful angel. Through my tears, I smiled. As the days went by, I did what I could to make the ghost happy. Sometimes he'd get in a bad mood. Just the other night, he told me the skin on my lips was ugly and chapped. I pulled the chapped skin away. Some of it went pretty far up my cheeks before it tore, but it was okay. The ghost talked on and on about how kissable I'd become. My parents arrived at my apartment this morning. They hadn't said they were coming, but it was a nice surprise. It'd been a while. But when they saw my face and my hands, they were horrified. My mom sobbed. "What happened to your beautiful face?" My dad, almost at the same time, exclaimed, "Oh my God, your hands are ruined." Tears started to leak from my eyes. Off in the corner, my ghost sighed. "They're the ones who make us so sad, aren't they?" I agreed. 10 minutes later, as I worked to saw their bodies into small parts, I asked the ghost if he'd be happier now that they weren't around. No answer. I turned around to see if he was listening. The little ghost was gone. Oh, that was a sudden end. I like this comment. Just deep. That's what she does with the skin. But the one to keep me from having to eat my limbs message, which I'm well aware is at the end of every story, gave me this mental picture I can't get rid of. Oh yeah? Let's go back to story index. Alright. Yep, these are brutal. Oh yeah, I see the call was ended. Well, hashtag make me mod. Eh, you know what? I could, since you are like one of the few people in here, but I don't really need a mod right now. Maybe later though. So tantalizing, right? Scary stories, depressing stories, horror stories, sad stories, stories about eating disorders, suicide stories. Ooh, that's one that I haven't seen yet. My constellation. Again, all of these are by Max. Whoever this guy is. My constellation. Hey, you know what? Here you go. Yep, just for the lulz. You're welcome. There's like Nothing really that you would have to moderate, though, except for people asking me to shout out their channel. My last day on Earth. Oh wait, I should read from the start. My constellation, December 10th, 2015. My last day on Earth. From the moment I was capable of proper self-reflection, I knew there was too much of me. I filled more space than any person should. I would study the area around myself and imagine lines drawn between my body and the objects nearby. The lines were too short, stout, vulgar lines barely spanning the interstices. I used to prove I wasn't sharing mass with the walls and furniture. A plan bloomed within me and seeded the foundation of my identity. As I was shuffled from foster home to foster home, I began to restrict the amount of food I consumed. The general lack of care for my well-being, which I'm certain would have devastated the psyche of other adolescents, was my greatest advantage. Actually, I have read this one before. With each refused meal, the line separating me from the mass of the world grew longer. I bathed in the reinforcing glow of success. As I got older, those around me would pay no attention to the scrapes on my index and middle fingers. They'd pay no attention to my hair, which fell out in clumps of rotting, mousy gossamer. Even if they noticed, even if they cared, they'd be disgusted. They weren't on a level which would allow them understand the purpose of my journey. You missed the word "to" there. Great, now I'm correcting his grammar. Oh well. Perhaps if they watched as I laid awake and traced the protrusions of my hip bones, ribs, and clavicles, watched every night for thousands of nights, as my fingers traced and I fantasized about valleys eroding into canyons and hillocks giving way to crags, they would see a girl who is in control. Oh gosh, it's another girl, really? Oh. Through my rituals, they learned the very meaning of control, of sacred, ruthless asceticism, of metamorphosis. Tonight, I can stand in the middle of the room and see lines floating through the space between myself and everything around me. They're longer than they've ever been. In moments, lines of space itself will be my corporeal legacy. Imagine a girl who, through abnegation and sacrifice, earned her place in the vast heavens. A girl with a glowing star marking each joint where bone once met bone. Civilizations would look upon her and trace the spaces between her stars with their own perfect lines. And then they would see my shape. No curves, just angles, only angles. For the first time in a decade, I'm feeling nostalgia for the days of ignorant joy before I knew my purpose. Days of innocent fantasies and childhood hedonism. Days cut short when I watched my family die. A 9-year-old girl left to stare at the drunken truck driver who crushed her mother, father, and brother against a wall. A 9-year-old girl with no control over life and death. I've changed since then. I'm ready to show the full power of my control. I control my hands as they open the bottle of pills. I control my gag reflex as I swallow every last one. I control my throat as it transports white wine down to my stomach to mix with the pills. I control my fingers as I type my last words to be read by a world unable to see the value of sacrifice. Stop it. It's time for them to learn. Watch tonight as the icy pitch of space brightens from the introduction of new stars. Watch together as the seeds of my effort and patience bear celestial fruit. The line separating life and death has always dictated my body's geometry. Now I'm crossing that line. My new identity will be points of radiant light with nothing but perfect emptiness in between. But I will be remembered. Anyone who wants to see the girl who dies tonight needs only to connect the dots. Chills. Bit of a shiver. Oh, I see. There's the feet, the body, and the head. Although I bet they ghosted that over the Big Dipper. Doop 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 doop. My mod in chat is saying stop it. These stories are very chilling. This title. Guys, I'm sad. uh yeah. Um if you haven't realized this yet though, yeah, I'm going to read one more. But if you recognize some of these stories as being part of what you see as reality, please seek help. uh, woo. Yeah, I'm going to have one more. For time. Dot, 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 dot. Shut up. Yeah. Three signs you may be an introvert and how to cope. Oh boy. Oh, I have read that one too. Hmm. Yep, I have read this one as well. And this one I don't want to read. It's teeth pulling. Okay. This title. Haha, guys, my parents think I'm a virgin, but I'm kinda, like, not. Lol. Okay, that's a continuation of another story. That one where it's like, guys, I'm sad. Yeah, it's just another mouse. Alright, I'm gonna finish it up with the last words of an explorer. For some reason, all these stories are written by Max on different days, all being scary stories. This one, however, has a creepypasta tag, Hidden City, Horror Stories, Lost Journal, and Scary Stories. Well, all of these are scary and unsettling horror stories. So, the last words of an explorer. September 9th, 2016. The city is on no one's map. If it had ever been, those people have long since died, as have their children and grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and great-great-grandchildren, and so on. Nonetheless, here the city stands. My source was right. My money was well spent. These ancient structures are black tombs. We've set up our camp on the outskirts. The city is far too cold. September 10th, 2016. Charles kept watch while I slept. He claimed to see no signs of life, but sounds kept him constantly alert. Soft sounds. Soft, wet, and unimposing. Hey, T-Dish. Oh, dang it. Sounds which drifted in and out of the limits of audibility, as if they were whispers, but windblown and damp, redolent of dying breaths and last words. I heard nothing. My sleep was as black as the structures ahead of us. No sounds penetrated the dreamless morass. For a brief moment upon waking, I believed to have been dead. Today, we toured the city. September 11th, 2016. Before the chill had sapped our energy, we had explored the first couple hundred feet of the city. We stuck to the outsides, cataloging the sheer stone faces of the structures. Despite their immense age, the buildings stood unharmed. We found no indication of what had made the sounds Charles had heard. Overnight, as Charles slept, I heard it myself. They were as he described. However, I recognized structure in the sporadic haze of noise. If it wasn't a language, it was a natural phenomenon unlike any I'd ever discovered. Well, it actually says unlike any ever discovered. My mind wandered while I watched Charles' chest rise and fall. The whispers suffused my auditory cortex in a synesthetic wave of hallucinatory strangeness swept through me. The The sounds shimmered in my visions and danced on my tongue. They tasted like metal, like blood. Rather than feeling disgusted, I felt a perverse sense of joy. September 12th, 2016. I blinked and Charles was gone. How could I have fallen asleep is a mystery as I was standing. But when my eyelids lifted, it was day. My partner had disappeared. In his place were footsteps leading to the city. The sounds are loud now. I'm miles within the bowels of the cold, black city. The sound... I'll read the same line twice, Stephen. Structures tower over me and block the sun. My breath freezes in front of my face on this late summer day. The temperature only contributes to the feeling of wrongness. When the wind blows, I think I hear Charles calling my name. Over and over and over and over. Swept by gales of air and changing pressures, and permeating the wet sounds which echo off every hut and dwelling. He calls, I will not sleep tonight. Well, of course. How could you sleep with all that sound? September 13th, 2016. The first sign of life presented itself to me early this morning. It was a fleck of skin or gristle glinting in the sunlight. It was attached to the side of a small structure. When I went in close to it, investigate, I discovered it was growing from deep within a crack in the stone. I pressed my knife into it, and it bled and retracted into the rock. If it weren't for the gales of wind and what I now know to be Charles's moans, I could have sworn I heard it make a noise. A tiny, wet noise. September 14th, 2016. I'm waiting for the days to skip. It is difficult to keep the fires from blowing out overnight. The expanse of the city is unlike what either of us had expected. I am beyond lost now. I am impelled ahead with the futile desire to help Charles and get us home. The deeper I get, the worse shape the structures seem to be in. All the cracks and missing pieces are filled with the same living tissue. Its density only increases as I follow the sounds, always following the sounds. I know I should be running in the opposite direction. The flesh within the buildings ripples in directional peristalsis. I am following it. I have yet to see any entrance to any structure. September 15th, 2016. The city is more meat than stone now. The wet whispers assault my ears and work to infiltrate all my senses. I feel them coursing through my body. Onward still I trudge. The temperature is warmer. I can think of nothing other than forward movement. September 16th, 2016. The cold has been replaced by heat and humidity. The stone has been subsumed by flesh. Titanic structures of muscle and veins reach toward the gray sky. All is wet. All is moving. Hey, welcome to the stream. September 17th, 2016. This morning, I discovered Charles. A Charles. Whether it was my partner or not is something I don't know. He was trapped within the meat of a structure. It appeared his body had been incorporated into the surrounding flesh. Thick veins fed his legs and neck. A few feet away, other Charleses were growing from different structures. All were in different forms of development. All twitched and moved with the all-encompassing fleshscape. They've since noticed me. They began with simple staring, but now they are reaching. The hands of my partner, the man I've loved, are extending toward my hands. Wait, okay, I forgot the narrator's name, but this seems like it may be gay? I don't know. The hands of my partner, the man I've loved, are extending towards my hands, hands which they've held countless times in what feels like a distant past. The wet whispers are seductive and intoxicating. Eh, wet whispers. Lol. I look back toward the sea of flesh and stone I've crossed to reach this point. The thought of the cold on the outskirts of the city is hideous. To leave this warm womb where I am wanted and accepted seems abhorrent. And now, as veins extend from the hands of the Charleses, patiently waiting for my acceptance, I have a choice. Do I leave cold and alone, or do I enter this union of flesh? I've been cold and alone for so long, I need to believe I'm ready for something new. Something warm, something we can experience together. Pray for me, pray for us. Alright, I still have some time left. I think I will end it with this one. It's short enough. These comments are really funny. Alright. 3 signs to know you may be an introvert and how to cope. These are all horror stories meant to scare you. But just know, your dreams are your own. Don't let the nightmares win. You're saying stop and chat. Well, this one's a special one. I'll end it after this one. It's been a good stream so far. If you don't want to listen, just for those that are watching the stream, if you guys don't want to listen too closely, turn on some music or something. I mean, it's easy. I've always felt anxiety and pressure in social situations. It wasn't that I disliked the people around me, far from it, but something about the expectation to perform in a social capacity always filled me with dread. For a while, I thought I was broken. Everyone I knew loved hanging out and being around one another. In one of my peaceful moments of alone time, I decided to do a little research to find out if something was wrong with me. I learned about introversion. I learned about countless millions of people just like me. It became my mission to discover and understand the ins and outs of that mindset so I could better myself. I finally realized I didn't have to change who I was. I could embrace it. Over the years, I've cultivated knowledge I may feel... Oh boy, I'm just gonna start the line over. Over the years, I've cultivated knowledge I feel may be helpful to other introverts who don't know there are other people like... who don't know there are people like them. I want to share with you some examples of situations where I felt uncomfortable and how I handled them. I don't expect everyone to encounter the exact same situations or react the same way, but I think this will be a good template for other introverts to use. Do you feel enormous anxiety about having to go to parties? You may be an introvert. Oh, bullet point 1, by the way. There was a party at my college. My boyfriend at the time, Jay, really wanted me to attend. This was at a really bad time in my life, and the last thing I wanted to do was plaster a smile on my face and interact with drunken strangers. I tried to convince Jay that I didn't feel well, and that the party wouldn't be a good idea, but he kept trying to guilt trip me into going. After a while, I told him I'd go. The party was a couple days away. I was really upset with both Jay and myself. I was mad at him for not respecting my claim that I was sick, but I also hated myself for being so messed up that I was forcing him to have to make me go to a silly party. I didn't sleep for 2 nights because I was so nervous. As my voice goes gravelly. Maybe I should keep it gravelly for this one. On the day of the party, while Jay was still sleeping, I secretly took a dose of syrup of Ipecac. When Jay awoke, I was in the bathroom puking my guts up. I'd never felt so sick in my life. But he finally believed me. Hours later, after he'd made sure I was going to be okay, he went to the party by himself. I'd won. My stomach still hurt, but the night alone was wonderful. By the way, Ipecac will make you barf. It's an old remedy. 2. Have you ever been at work and been told you need to do something that fills you with dread because you'll have to interact with other people? You may be an introvert. Or should I make it a happier tone? You may be an introvert. What's the point? Dang it, I'm getting into character too well. Years later, there was a mandatory retreat at my job. All employees had to go for team building or something similarly awful. I just started feeling comfortable at work too. I'm a designer, so I get to spend almost all day alone, drawing logos or characters or whatever for clients. Hearing I had to go on this retreat brought terrible, breathless anxiety. I didn't know what to do. On my drive to the convention center, I saw a homeless man sitting near a payphone. I had an idea. We spoke for a few seconds. I handed him a quarter and a $20 bill. Then I got back in my car. I drove up the street, parked, and watched the man in my mirror. He picked up the phone and dialed. A minute or two later, he hung up and ran away. I pulled the car back into traffic and kept going toward the retreat. 10 minutes later, I got a phone call from my supervisor saying someone had called in a bomb threat at the convention center. We were to come to the office and treat it as a normal workday. Wow. Dude. Yeah, that is a bit extreme. Bullet 3. Point 3. Does the thought of seeing people from your past make you feel awful because you'll be in a situation where you need to talk about your life? You may be an introvert. My sister Melinda was having her baby shower. She was only a couple years older than me, so I knew many of the same people in high school. She's still friends with most of them. I'm not. Most of them used to make fun of me, while others only talked to me because I was Melinda's sister. I didn't want to go, at all. My car was in the shop, so Melinda offered to pick me up. There was no use trying to fake being sick. Mel knows I'm an introvert and get anxious in social situations, but this was important to her. She wouldn't take no for an answer. She picked me up a few hours before the party so we could go to our parents' house where the event was being hosted. The plan was to help Mom set things up so she didn't have to do it all. I wanted to do the setting up and leave, but that was out of the question. Mel's phone rang while we were on our way. It was her friend, Denise. Apparently, Denise and 8 other guests had arrived early to help Mom with the decorating so Mel wouldn't have to. While Mel was elated, I was distraught. I built in a mental countdown that gave me 3 hours before I'd have to be around those people. I was planning on using those hours to try to get myself in a state of mind where I could accept being with them. But now it was gone. I had no time to prepare. I started to silently panic as we hurtled down the highway toward my impending social cataclysm. I was sweating, everything blurred. My heartbeat was like a series of constant detonations behind my ribcage. Ahead of us, on the side of the highway, I saw a family of deer. One of the fawns placed a foot on the pavement. I saw an opportunity. I screamed, "Look out!" and grabbed the steering wheel. Turning it in the opposite direction, our car struck the median, flipped over it, and sent us into oncoming traffic. Oh gosh. Another car hit us at 75 miles per hour. Somehow, when the whirlwind of chaos had ended and the car was no longer moving, I was relatively unhurt. My arm and leg were broken, that I could tell immediately, but everything else seemed okay. Mel's side had taken the brunt of it. Mel was pinned by her legs by the steering column. She was bleeding badly from her head, but she was breathing. Her hands were flailing at her belly. I looked down. A piece of metal from God knows where had carved a deep gash along her lower abdomen. I could see a wet loop of intestine sticking out and something else. A tiny, twitching foot. Oh gosh. I should have told you to cover your ears already. The baby shower was cancelled. So if any of these scenarios of socialization and togetherness make you feel anxious or lightheaded, you may be an introvert. I hope this helps because nothing is worse than feeling like you have no control over your life. Sometimes it's just good to be alone, and you know what? There's nothing wrong with it. There's no shame in being different. I would have to say there is one thing wrong with that. As this person put, the last one was really was a surprise. This guy put it, Jesus. I'd rather kill than go meet people, literally. Oh gosh, Madison, you may definitely be an introvert. Max, you and me both. I love how some people thought this was actually advice for introverts and whined accordingly about how drastic the coping methods were, and not, an unsettling story. I can say that I did sort of predict the ending, though. Yeah. Yeah, this person was like, this is rather extreme. And, da 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 da. Sometimes medicine is the best cure. Trust your doctors, people. Trust them. They may be the only thing keeping you alive one day. Anyway, on that note, I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope you all have a good spooky evening. Bye bye.